Thank you so much for part of this session. Security is an integral part of the entire BFSI ecosystem, and that is what we are going to discuss in this fireside chat. The topic of this particular session is holistic view of cybersecurity in banking and trains to look out in 2021. And I have with me Shalini Warrior, the Executive Director and CEO and Business Head Retail at Federal Bank. Ms. Warrior, welcome to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Amol. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And my next speaker is Alian Sanchez, who looks after the Europe, Middle East, and Africa market as a CISO and senior evangelist for Fortinet. Alian, welcome to this discussion.
Thank you, Amol. I'm really delighted to be part of this discussion today.
Great. I'm really happy that both of you are here, and I'm going to explore multiple things about the cyber security because this is going to be the crucial area. At one side, all the BFSI companies are going really high in adopting digital, which is very, very crucial. But on the other side, it has a black side, and that is the hackers, that is the security breaches. So to begin with, Ms. Warrior, I will come to you. And to start with, I will have a basic question for you. What kind of security measures or the security strategy that you have crafted for Federal Bank?
Thanks, Amol. The topic is, as you rightly said, very relevant in today's times. As we've kind of gone through pandemic, etc., the volume of digital transactions have gone up, but at the same time, the risk involved in digital is pretty well known. So if I were to speak about Federal Bank, first of all, anything to do with risk and security is and has always been the center point for our strategy. It has been not just at the CXO level, but if you go further at the board level, it's literally a standing agenda item on the board discussions. And if you go across the levels in the organization, it is all pervasive. Every level in the organization has a responsibility towards security. So a couple of things first of all, from an organizational structure perspective, we've delineated roles and responsibilities very, very clearly. We have, as I said, security is everybody's responsibility, but you have to keep some people kind of at the center of it and accountable for it. So in a structural sense, we've got the 3 lines of defense very, very clearly marked out. So you've got the first line of defense, which is within the IT team. We have a team of people, professionals, who are called the Information Security Compliance Team. They perform the first line of defense. They are the first port of call for anything to do with security. The second line of defense is our risk management colleagues. Independent again of IT, the Chief Information Security Officer and his team of people. And last but not the least, the third line of defense is in the internal audit team. So the delineation of these 3 lines of defense and each one's role and responsibility is pretty clearly articulated, and their KPIs are also tuned along that. Coming to the specifics, I would split it into 3 parts. The first is obviously the actual protection measures. And I think every bank does that. We've also done it, whether you look at, intrusion protection systems, wireless web application firewalls, antivirus, anti-threat protection, network access controls, all of it is there. Things like patch application are very, very carefully scrutinized. We use technology to roll out patches, and we monitor the percentage at which patches have been rolled out very carefully. So actual protection is definitely a big chunk. And, typically about 15 to 20% of our budgets on capital expenditure in the IT area would go towards things like these protection measures. Having said that, I think we've now obviously got to go beyond protection. There's also a very large role for detection. And that's the second kind of tranche that we talk about. In that area, we've got 24/7 security operations center. We've got threat intelligence that we subscribe to, and we subscribe to multiple of them because one could miss out something which the other one would find. So we have, 3 of them that we subscribe to from a threat intelligence perspective. And the most important point in my view, which is the third kind of bucket of it, is the whole aspect of training and kind of learning. So there's a lot of investment made in training of employees, because I honestly think the weakest link in the chain could be that, one employee not knowing what happens when a phishing email comes, or, any of those things that happen. So there's a lot of investment in training of employees. There's also a lot of investment in participating in things like cyber drills, red team exercises, etc., so that the general skill levels go up. In addition to that, we as bankers also have a role to play in terms of training of our customers.
Right.
because our customers could get, I think the classic fraud that, I'm sure Amol, happens in India is OTP being compromised.
Yes.
And, customer just gets kind of, hoodwinked, if I can call it that, into revealing his OTP to somebody else. So protecting against that is another ingredient, and that we spend a lot of time using various means to educate customers on how it is important to keep these basic security measures in place. So at an overarching level, the organization structure, but within that, a set of protection, detection, and training. That's how I would say the whole cybersecurity journey for Federal Bank has been and will continue to be.
Very well said. In fact, what I can say, a detailed, opening remarks, Ms. Warrior, and in fact, you covered many aspects of it. I will come to specifically detection a little later because RBI is also talking about early warning signals these days. But I was talking to one CISO and he says, cyber drills are so important that we should follow fire brigade now. And the way they are conducting fire drills at big corporate and big offices, corporate houses, we should conduct, cyber drills like that. So, good views here, Ms. Warrior, and Ali, and I will come to you now. Most of the banks have compromised, and lost a lot of money. Obviously, I don't want to speak specifically about the recent incident, but just take that into consideration. Alien, the largest bank in India, HDFC Bank, was also went under certain issues into security. What I'm trying to tell you here is, Alien, a lot of issues are happening in the banking system. And it's not only happening with the small banks or the mid-level banks, but also with the large banks who claims that they have the strongest of security. Considering all these issues, what is going wrong with the banks according to you in terms of security?
Well, before speaking about what could go wrong, we have to recognize one thing. The banking system have saved our economies in the last 12 months. We've asked them in a completely different architecture landscape where almost overnight, 95% of the global population was working from home. Let me remind you that the most visionaries of the analysts predicted at the beginning of February 2020, which is about a year from now. They are very trustable analysts, and they were predicting by 2023, 30% of the workforce is about to work from home. Literally days after that, 90% of the population, in my case, it was 95% of the people work from home. You imagine the changes, the certainty and the breadth of the changes. And despite that, the banks have continued to innovate, to create new products, to adapt. Now, we have to recognize one thing. While this was happening, the threats did not stop. The threat has grown in sophistication and in volume. Let me give you one number. In the last 10 years, the order of magnitude of the number of records that have been stolen has been 3 orders of magnitude. It's not 10 times, it's not 100 times, it's 1,000 times more record stolen. Very few missions of security have to deal with one enemy that has grown in volume 3 orders of magnitude. And that's just the volumetry. In terms of sophistication, we see rampant threat. We see the hackers being able to have dormant pieces of software that intrinsically do not seem to represent a threat, and all of a sudden will be associated in a very articulated and sometimes very sophisticated threat. And meanwhile, the economies did not collapse. We could continue doing transactions. I think the first thing we have to do is to thank the bank for having hold the fort, hold the economical fort. Now, the second thing I would say about the rise of sophistication is, in order to offer more innovative services, remote transaction and trading, the ability to have literally an agency, a bank agency in your smartphone, including being able to have a real-time discussion with your financial advisory. All these beautiful innovations that I insist did not stop over the last 12 months. And we have to be thankful for that. They increase the attack surface because you have more devices, more applications, more transactions, and more speed. The implementation of 5G, for instance, is not only that it goes faster, but it's also the way 5G works is not just 4G on steroids. It's a new distributed model into which the services can be called upon and instantiated at a very granular level, depending on the actual need of the end user. And that increases what we call the attack surface. And the bad guys out there and the incidents take advantage of that. But when we have this holistic view that Shalini just described with these 3 layers of protections, the IT, the security, and the audit, and you're not depending on one single technology or one single product, but you have this ability to have what you call that's why I like very much the title of our discussion today, in a holistic view of cybersecurity. And you include, like it was very well highlighted by Shalini earlier, the human dimension, the training into that. You put yourself in a different position. Basically, what you want to have is a platform that has 3 main attributes. It needs to be broad in its scope, detection, analysis, and defense. It needs to be integrated in its components. You cannot have what was the way of buying cybersecurity in the early 2000s, where the word old school best of breed was a little bit of a process which give me the best antivirus, and then regardless to its integration capabilities, give me what was seen by that time as the best sandbox or the best access network for someone else later to integrate it. We don't have that time, we don't have that budget, we don't have that skill set like we used to have 20 years ago, and the threat is a lot more demanding. So there's nothing really wrong with the bank. It's just that they are at the edge of innovation, and where the demand for continuing to the business continuity has never been higher. And I think when you have these 3 attributes, you put your customers, your vendors, and yourself in the best possible situation.
Okay. Noted, Alien. Valid points. In fact, a different perspective, I must say. Ms. Warrior, I will come to you, and I would like to have your specific views on the partnerships and the collaborations that you have with the third parties. You remember that story of Frankenstein, where he created the monster and he could not tame the monster later on, right? So what is happening today is with the banks, they are giving a lot of training to their employees, third parties, but ultimately the result shows that there is some breaches with the third party and the employees as well, right? So how actually you are going to tame it? How are you actually going to control all these things, prevent the data thefts, and ensure that your bank is safe?
So Amol, obviously the world is becoming a much more connected place. Banks like us are increasingly dependent on third-party partners. And in a large sense, there is a lot of collaboration also. So there is one set of dependence. I mean, we, for example, are dependent on our card personalization vendor who gets a lot of data regarding our customer, our vendor who helps us do reward points and works through reward points. So yes, the world is becoming very interconnected. Banking is no longer standalone. It is reliant. It is reliant on third parties to do things which they specialize on, which banks do not have specialization on. Also, there is a collaboration with fintech partners. We do a lot of work, for example, with GPays of the world and, the Paisa Bazaars of the world and the Pine Labs of the world. So yes, this whole third party collaboration is a new, I think it's a new trait that bankers have to develop, and all of us are kind of learning along the way. From a customer standpoint, God forbid there is a problem at one of the third party providers, customer says it's a bank problem, and he's right, the customer is right, it's the bank that has chosen to go the use of third parties. So coming to what exactly we do, we obviously very careful when we deal with it, but I think that's, we can't be in a situation where we don't work with them, right? Then there is, no reward, right? You have to work on these partnerships because there is a cost angle to it, a revenue angle to it, and there's always a risk reward trade-off that we have to do. So what we've actually done is, and we've evolved over the last couple of years. First of all, we have a very, very strong third-party empanelment and third-party monitoring policy. It's a very, very robust document. It covers, the various kinds of parties, whether it's a fintech, whether it's a card perso vendor, whether it's a rewards partner, it covers various. So we have a kind of policy, and what we do is, before we enter into a partnership, we do an initial assessment of our relationship with that partner. What exactly is going to be the level of data that we're going to share? Obviously, it's only on a need-to-know basis. We try and make sure we ring-fence it as much as possible, but we kind of go through that assessment and we risk rate these. So, at the top end could be somebody who we are forced or not forced, who we need to share a lot of data with, but there could be others who we don't need to share too much data. So we have a risk rating, which says level 1, level 2, level 3 kind of thing, depending on the level of risk of data sharing that is there. Having done the risk rate, we have measures against them as to what is the due diligence we should do before we onboard the third party. And we, at the top end of the spectrum, we would have a due diligence conducted, for example, by one of the big four, going and actually auditing, making sure everything is okay. At some of the lower risk items, we would probably have one of our own audit team going and doing the assessment. So we kind of customize it by the level of risk we're taking. So having risk rated it and having done the due diligence, the report of the due diligence is a very, very critical kind of input into the final decision-making process. All the risks identified, classified high, medium, low, have to be duly mitigated, and proof of mitigation has to be shown. And we work very closely with the third party to get that done. The next is that we have a very strong kind of contractual obligations. So, the third party also has to have skin in the game. So the contractual obligations are very tightly woven into the agreements. We use, expertise from lawyers, depending on the level of risk that we're running. So we have an agreement that covers the contractual obligations. Now, having done all this at onboarding, it's not that we can forget it, right? So we have literally a monthly assessment for some of these to show how the progress has been and what are some of the risks that we have. In every case, we do an annual assessment. We actually do an annual audit to see if the controls that were expected to be in place are actually in place or not. So between the empanelment process, the risk rating process, the due diligence, the contractual obligations, and the ongoing monitoring, we've identified what the risks are and found mitigating controls for them. So ultimately, Amol, this is about risk reward. In a individualistic, monopolistic way, I could say, no, I will not deal with any of them. That would be foolish for me as a banker to do. So we've taken a risk-based approach to this. And honestly, we've had very good relationships with our, all our partners, whichever side of the business they are in. So that's how we've gone about doing it. And I think a lot of the banks are doing most of the same thing, I'm sure.
Okay, I think again, insightful answer, Ms. Warrior. Alian, have you seen this movie called Titanic? Have you watched this movie?
Of course.
The one thing which we learned from the Titanic is, Titanic did not know that there is an iceberg, right? And it hit the iceberg because they did not know it. Now let's assume Titanic is a bank. Now Titanic knows that there is an iceberg. Now banks knows that there are hackers. There are security breaches. So how Titanic should save or prevent from hitting the iceberg?
It's a great analogy. Let's come back to one word that was just mentioned that to me is very important. The Titanic took a level of risk that is accumulation of risk management mistake that I feel the banking sector is not doing right now. The first thing is it was the maiden trip of the Titanic, and the Titanic had not been tested. He left Belfast, where it was built in Ireland, went to Newcastle the next day, and the next day after, he was off to New York, right? There was no testing really of one of the most complex machines ever built in 1912, which was the year of where he sank. This is not what the risk management aspects, such as DevOps and the other best risk management practices are meant to do. Quite the opposite. A second thing is the Titanic was under scrutiny in many ways. The speed was 22 knots at the moment that he hit the icebergs, which is the maximum speed of a ship that was built early in 1909 between 1912. And that is also a mistake that was made by the Captain Smith by that time. And last thing is we need to integrate, we as cybersecurity officer, more systematically the risk dimension, which is a new language. It's like learning a new language, because that risk language is fully understood by the other members of the board. You see, as part of the lobbies of the Titanic, the people did not speak the same language. The captain was speaking the Navy language. The press was speaking the language of communication. And the White Star Line was speaking the language of finance. And there was no Esperanto, there was no common ground that could have looked at all the risks that were taken at the same time and say, no, we're completely off track here. Right. The risk is this new Esperanto in cybersecurity. And the good news is when you are managing a network and a security center, you got all the elementary components that enable you to properly assess the risk. And assessing that risk is not only something that happens in the captain, in the CISO word, I would say. It is a healthy conversation between the CISO, the CMO, the CFO, the CEO, and the legal, the head of legal, all the representatives of the board. And then they all sign off between different risk scenarios, and they're all part of its execution. And that would avoid not seeing the iceberg, going too fast on a maiden trip, and it would avoid all the disaster that actually happened to the Titanic, but that I don't think is likely to happen to the financial sector.
Wow, I just used that analogy, but you created an entire picture. I did not know that you have done so much research on Titanic. In fact, you remember the name of the captain as well. Wow, quite interesting, Alain. Very impressive. But good, I think.
I found that really interesting,
sure.
Alain. Thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Ms. Warrior, now my question to you is specifically about the gaps that specifically you find in the banking operations in terms of protecting the data. Because there is an employee attrition, they keep changing, new parties comes and goes, you will also keep changing the vendors. So how actually bankers should look at these gaps?
So I think we've spoken a little bit about it in the earlier question on third party, but I'll try and kind of take that a little further. Yeah. So I think it's a risk. We all have to recognize the risk. And I think what we really have to do is, and what we continually look at is first, how aware are we of the threat landscape? Have we looked forward into the future? In a very large sense, banks sometimes lack a very disciplined process of assessing cyber risk. It becomes a little ad hoc in exercise. So the first step that we've done, and we're encouraging, and getting better and better at it, is make a complete inventory of all our data, applications, network infrastructure. Where are all these points where data is stored? And classify the data, because not all data is as important as each other. There's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are the three kind of pillars of data. So we classify the data, and using a one-size-fits-all approach would be very expensive for banks. So you have to classify the data to make sure that you understand, what's the level of risk we're running with it, and then have different strategies based on the level of risk of the data. So that's one thing we've done. Obviously, from a tools perspective, the entire stuff of data leakage prevention, all those tools are there, the training of the employees I spoke about. But increasingly, the focus is moving away from protection, as we've said, to detection and response. Keeping pace with, kind of fraudsters, hackers, sometimes is difficult. I think, we recognize that. So rather than, yes, there is some level of investment on protection, but an increasing focus now is on how do we detect, how quickly can we detect, and once detected, how quickly can we kind of ring fence it to prevent potential issues. So the detection is that, all the stuff that we spoke about in terms of the SOC, the training, everything plays a role on the detection side of it. And then the response is obviously a very, very calibrated response, a very, very focused cyber security incident response plan that is tested often and, put into practice. Third-party management, I've covered that in a fair level of detail, but I'm not repeating that. I just want to repeat the point that, our risk is increasingly not in the bank, but in all our associations with third parties, and therefore I've covered that earlier. So between, classifying the data, having a kind of differentiated, customized strategy for each class, for each category of data, to focusing more and more on detection and response through various tools, and having a very robust third-party management. I think with that spectrum, we've tried to make sure we cover our risks from a data perspective. Are we perfect? I think it's difficult to say. This is not something we can ever say we've reached perfection. In my view, it's every day we've got to get better and better at it.
So can you also add something there, Ms. Warrior, on the early warning signals that which RBI is talking about? Can that be a great detection method?
Sure. I think obviously that's where the role of, I think RBI also does this extensively. The role of things like SOC comes in place, the Security Operations Center. How are the capabilities in the security, and capabilities in terms of tools and techniques, people, the kind of people that we have, how alert are they, etc. So the whole aspect of, SOC, etc. And then third-party kind of intelligence that we subscribe to, continually watching the so-called dark web and, giving us insights. So yes, the early warning signals from these aspects, understanding even the slightest issue on the SOC triggers a certain escalation process, and everybody gets into the act immediately to see if it is, serious, not serious, what is it a false threat, etc. So, Amol, I think, between the SOC and the third-party kind of intelligence agencies that we've subscribed to, we've enhanced our entire early warning piece, because we recognize that we cannot always be one step ahead of the hackers, But I think there's one element, Amol, which I spoke earlier about, which is employee training. Our biggest risk and our weakest link could be one employee who forgets that, he's not supposed to click on that link. He's not supposed to give his password. That one employee could forget it, could think. So a huge amount of focus on training. Cybersecurity training is mandatory from the CEO downwards to the last person. Twice a year, it's mandatory to go through that training for us.
Oh, true. I think valid points. In fact, if you look at even the reports by even PwC or Deloitte or Kroll, they also suggest the same thing that, most of the times the employee is one of the weakest link in the bank. So Alian, you're obviously listening to Ms. Warrior, and she's also talking about the challenges that the banks face and how are actually the dealing with it and what are the weakest links. We are aggressively using the digitalization and adopting digital like there is no tomorrow, which is also the need. But going ahead, even though the hackers are also getting as smart as possible, and in fact far more smarter than the CISO at a bank, So how banks or the financial institutions should protect themselves going ahead in the future? If you have important tips here.
Yes, I think one of the pillars of the architecture of cybersecurity of the future is a combination of factors. The first one is we witness a merger between the security as a discipline, as an infrastructure, as a team, and the networking, again, as an infrastructure, as a discipline, as a team. We call that security-driven networking. And we've seen that merger happening in the banking sector already. If you take the example of the way agencies are managed, bank agencies, there's a technology that crystallizes this merging between networking and security, and it's called SD-WAN, SD branch. It's a technology that is initially a pure networking technology. It means software-defined wide area network. In other words, the applications talks to the router and tell the router which route should be chosen depending on the SLA of the application, depending on the confidentiality level of the transaction, depending on economical factor, if you are going to an MPLS lease line or can encapsulate some of your frames into the internet. And that merger between security and networking has lots of advantages. The first one is you don't put a bank in a situation to design an innovative services from a networking perspective. Where do I need to put my access points? How do I develop my applications? What sort of collaborative features are we going to take that? And then once you have done that, you say, oops, I have security to apply on top of that. Because if you do that, you create by constructions vulnerabilities in your network. So as you do that simultaneously, where the security agenda not only becomes something that comes after or something that hinders or slows down the security, but on the contrary, become a banking innovative enabler, then you have the two agendas working at the same time together. And that security-driven networking, namely in the banking and financial sector, is one of the pillars of the architectures of tomorrow. Let me name two other ones that are equally important. The first one is a great concept, but in a weird word. It's called zero trust network access. The last thing you want to do with the bank is to stop trusting your vendors, your customers, your employee. However, what it does mean is every devices, every user, every transaction, every application needs to earn in real time the right to use the networking resources that it requires. It goes with superior authentication of the transaction. It deals with a series of technology that enable you to have a real-time visibility, because you can't protect what you can't see, and a real-time integrity of all the innovative transactions that are necessary for the banks of tomorrow. And the last thing goes with the human dimension. The human brain does a number of things very well and a number of things not so well. And when you ask someone in the security operating center to do repetitive tasks or a correlation between what happens at the NOC level, at the network level, and what happens at the security level manually, and in a very repetitive manner, you generate a fatigue that at the end of the day damages your ability as a cyber analyst to detect a threat. So we use artificial intelligence as a way not to replace, but to second the human brain, sort of alleviating him from the repetitive task and concentrate on what the person, a normal person, does best, which is finding creative way to address trends that are actually real trends, not false positives or not the root cause. So these three pillars, security-driven networking, zero trust network access, and artificial intelligence-driven operations are, in my opinion, the building blocks, the real foundation of the innovative banking and financial applications of tomorrow.
Refined thoughts, Ali, and on the future of security for the banking structure entirely. I think very, very meaningful. It was really pleasure, in fact, listening to you and Miss Gary. Also, your thoughts are also amazing. I'm sure the participants would have loved it. So I wish I could have taken more questions, but the time is up. The clock is already ticking. It's more than a half an hour. But thank you so much, Miss Warrior and Alien, for sharing your amazing thoughts. I'm so sure the bankers and the financial professionals, those who are watching this show, watching this discussion, will gain something and try to build their security as strong as possible. Thank you so much for taking part into this conclave.